Welcome to the World Values Network. Tonight, I will be in conversation with Sean Spicer. Sean is the author of a new book, The Briefing. He is one of the most recognizable names in American politics, given his tenure as the first press secretary to President Donald Trump. I consider Sean a friend. I want to note before we begin, and I'm not going to do any lengthy introductions because we're very tight on time this evening, but I want to note that in all my interactions with Sean Spicer, I have found him to be an extremely warm gentleman. This goes back to his time in the White House. A very good friend of the Jewish community and Israel. He was honored by our organization, the World Values Network, at our big gala this past March. When he became the White House press secretary, the tone of the American administration towards Israel changed. It changed in briefings, it changed in outlook, and we wanted to recognize that. Let me also say that we're not a political organization, obviously. We're a values-based, a Jewish values-based organization. We will praise political figures and administrations when they do the right thing. We'll be critical when we feel that they are contravening some of our core values. But when it comes to Israel and its security, let me just acknowledge, given this is the beginning of the Jewish year, yesterday was the holiest day of the Jewish calendar, Yom Kippur, and one of the highest Jewish values is called Hakarat Tov, and that means gratitude. Gratitude is one of the highest Jewish values. Let me just say that this administration, of which you were an integral part, has exceeded all our expectations on Israel and its security and support for the Jewish state and reversing incredible animosity towards Israel at the United Nations. The messaging has changed from the United States so significantly, let alone the withdrawal from the Iran nuclear agreement, stopping the funding of payments to the Palestinian Authority where it would be used for incitement or to pay terrorists, the Taylor Force Bill, et cetera, et cetera. I have no time to go through all of this other than to say that we're grateful, and we're very grateful that you're here this evening. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Sean Spicer.
Thank you, Rabbi.
I actually have two of your books. One is a surprise for my wife. It's my wife's birthday, and she'll be here shortly. But
what better of a gift?
Yes, exactly. So the first thing I want to discuss, and we're gonna move through things. Again, we want to try to cover a lot of ground in a short period of time. And you're very busy, and you're running all over the place. And thank you very much for being here this evening. You had a very contentious interview about your book on the BBC, and I was impressed at your composure. I was impressed that you did not allow the interview to get under your skin, and I was impressed at the courage to admit fault.
Yeah.
And that was impressive to me. I think that's a core religious idea, that we are prepared to acknowledge our humanity, because we're not perfect. Certainly in our religion, Judaism, none of our biblical figures, we don't even have a Jesus figure. There's no divine figures. All of our figures are flawed. And that teaches us that righteousness is found not in perfection, but in struggle. The struggle to be a better man, a better woman. And you were saying that over and over again, but she was taking your acknowledgement of error as a way to attack you even more. And we started discussing this last night because we Jews just went through this penitential period of 10 days of repentance, beginning with the Jewish New Year, Rosh Hashanah, then continuing with the Jewish Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur yesterday. And we're supposed to say we're sorry, but it seems that in America, if you show any kind of acknowledgement of fault, it just invites further attack.
I think that's absolutely right. Well, first, let me just say thank you for inviting me here. I've said this at your dinner, and I'll say it again in this setting, but not every day was amazing at the White. There were some bad days, personally, and I always said that the one thing that got me through was when people would call and say, "I'm thinking of you, I'm praying for you," and there was no better friend than Rabbi Shmuley. He would call and just send you a note and just say, "Thinking of you," and it's.
Thank you.
But this gets back to what you're asking about, which is that we all are fallible. We all make mistakes, and we are a forgiving people, and we are a forgiving nation. And I think what makes us good people is to recognize when we didn't live up to the expectations of the Lord and say, I could be better. Even if we're not wrong, even if the interaction, I always go back to most of what we need to do is follow the Bible, but a lot of it is really what our moms teach us, which is like 2 wrongs don't make a right. Just because they did it doesn't mean you need to. And there are days when I thought, okay, I don't know that interaction I was in the wrong, but I certainly didn't react the right way. And I went back and said, can I be a better person? Was that the right thing to do? And there were days when I called, there are a couple of reporters, I don't know if I will go on the record and say this, but I called them in my office. I said, I just want to tell you, I really didn't like that interaction. I'm not saying I liked how you handled it, but I want to apologize for how I handled it. Because I do think that there is something about asking forgiveness and saying to someone that I wasn't the best person I could be, or frankly, I was just wrong. But we have gotten to the point now where we use that as an attack line, which is, aha, you admit you were wrong. See, I was right. It's not just good enough to say, I accept you. I accept your apology. I forgive you. It's now I know I was right. You were wrong. I'm going to further humiliate you or punish you. And what it does is create a system where then no one wants to admit fault. Because they recognize if I admit fault, then you will seize on that to further demonize me. I think that's a bad thing for society. I think that's a bad thing for us as people. When we should want to go to somebody and say, I value you, I respect you, I care about you. Even if it's a complete stranger, just saying, as a fellow human, this is what God teaches us. But I didn't act the way I should have with you. And I want you to know I'm sorry about that. And then we, as that, not only should we should want to accept that. I forgive you for that. That doesn't mean that you can just go on and everything's the same. Some sins are greater than others. But I think it makes it harder for someone to ask for forgiveness if they know that the person that they're going to talk to isn't going to not only accept it, but to demonize them or punish them.
Yeah, and the death of forgiveness in America is very problematic because it means that we can never be reconciled. It means like one strike and you're out. And it denies our humanity. And it's very troubling. And I was thinking about this over Yom Kippur, and then in preparation for tonight, I was watching a lot of the interviews, and I was just astonished. Which brings me to the next thing. And we're going to move, as I said, we're going to move through things fairly briskly. You're a great friend of Israel and the Jewish community. We showed that by giving you a significant award. But you were criticized for a comment about, and you apologized for it, but I want to actually examine what happened in Syria. You said that after the president decided to strike Syria with 59 Tomahawk missiles to punish Assad for gassing innocent, and all children are innocent, but innocent Arab Muslim children who were gassed to death, mustard sarin gas. And now Bob Woodward describes the president's reaction in greater detail, how disgusted he was seeing the children's skin peeling off and foaming at the mouth. And he decided that this tyrant was going to be punished. This tyrant who had gotten away with it since 2013, crossing President Obama's red lines. And then this fraudulent thing with Russia that they would remove all the chemical weapons, which turned out to be an utter lie. So you were defending American action and standing up to a tyrant. And you said that even Hitler did not gas his people. I understood what you meant, which is why I defended you immediately. What you meant was Hitler did not consider the Jews his people. He didn't consider the invalids where he used poison gas his people. You were saying that even Hitler did not attack Germans, but Assad will slaughter his own people. I was amazed that people went after you even for that, given the fact that we Jews know more than anyone else how serious it is for people to be gassed to death. And this administration finally did something. And I, as an American, if you look around the walls, you'll see New York Times ads that this organization took out, begging President Obama to protect those Muslim kids in Aleppo and Damascus and punish Assad for gassing children to death. And you were part of an administration that did it, and then you get slammed for it.
Yeah, I mean, look, I did not articulate. I mean, here's the thing. I write about this in the book.
I know you're very apologetic, but the truth is what the administration is very important.
But I think for folks that are watching, they need to understand that, like, that particular briefing, I think it was like the 11th or 12th question on the same subject. I had basically said, this is how bad Assad is. He's this bad. He is this bad. He's this bad. He is this bad. I think it was like the 12th question. I said, all right, I'm going to ratchet it up. Should have just stopped at 11. And I was like, I'm going to show you how much we really think this guy is a tyrant, how appalled we are at what he's done, how the president was so moved by the heinous acts that he had committed. And I just sort of went off and not recognized the misstep that I had made. And you said it better than I did, which is I clearly was trying to show the degree to which we were appalled by his heinous acts and why he had taken action and how the president was so moved. I screwed up. I stepped in it. I didn't use it. The words the way that I should have. And you're right. It's like if I had just said on the battlefield. And again, look.
But your intention was to point out what
correct.
a tyrant
Not only
he is.
that, but here's the thing. I had done media training for years, and I said never invoke Hitler. Just don't. It's like the dumbest thing you can possibly do, because it's not smart. And I was doing exactly what I had told everyone never do. I mean, it was one of the first things Vice President walked in. He goes, "What did you always teach me?" And I'm like, "I know, never." But for some reason, I had wanted to ratchet it up to talk about how the president was so moved by these heinous acts. And to your point, I think if you look at the previous, this wasn't like coming out of the chute. This was the 12th question. I think if you were in that room or watching the briefing anywhere in the world, you understood how outraged we were. And yet it was, aha, we got you. We now can say that we can find some way to turn this on you. And that's what I thought was somewhat appalling, which was if you had watched 2 seconds of anything that it had before, you know how much we had spoken out and articulated the president's concern over what had happened and how moved he was, and yet this was their opportunity to go after me.
So, we Jews are prepared to invoke Hitler when it comes to actions on the part of others that emulate his genocidal intent.
Well, I think that you get a different
right.
pass on that.
And the use of poison gas, whether it's Jewish children, whether it's Muslim children, that is an abomination.
Yeah.
And the United States punished him for it, and that was a critical, moral response to evil. Following in that line, Leslie Wexner, who's a well-known Jewish philanthropist, owns Victoria's Secret, many other brands. He recently said that he was going to leave the Republican Party over a speech that President Obama gave in Ohio 2 weeks ago, where President Obama kind of broke with protocol and came out against the sitting president and said, President Trump, how hard was it to condemn neo-Nazis in Charlottesville? This is a big issue in the Jewish community. And I said at the time the president should be much more forceful in the condemnation of these neo-Nazis. But I wrote something that also said, with all due respect to President Obama, how hard was it to condemn Iran's repeated intent to annihilate Israel? And the United States did not only not condemn that through the years of the Iran nuclear negotiations, but we actually rewarded them. We rewarded them with $150 billion in unfrozen assets, billions of dollars in cash. And President Obama did not once say, saying you're going to kill all the Jews, that you really can't negotiate with people that say that. So I wanted to know if you, following up from Syria and the administration having a policy that would hold tyrants accountable, whether you wanted to comment on that.
Well, I mean, you enumerated some of the things that this president's done. The one thing that I know you know better than anyone, but he also moved the embassy to Jerusalem for the first time, which has been U.S. policy for decades. A simple thing that a lot of politicians have said, but when came every 6 months, cited national security reasons, this president did it. Look, I think when you take a look at this president's actions, if you're purely calling balls on strikes on an administration that is acting in the best interests of Israel, I don't think there's any objective way not to say that this administration has been the most pro-Israel in modern time. And so, but I think that there are people who are constantly looking for that way to say, yeah, but. I mean, this is a president who just expelled, when they found a Nazi living in this country, expelled him. And so at what point do you at least give him some credit? Never mind recognize the totality of what he's done. And I'm not trying to do this Obama versus Trump thing.
And neither am I. I want to really focus on the values.
You're not, but you're not. And I don't mean to say, but I'm saying that for people who say that they care about this, you at least admit that the president and this administration has been extremely pro-Israel, has done on a bipartisan basis. I mean, it has been President Clinton, President Bush, President Obama who've talked about moving an embassy. It's President Trump who did it. It has been a lot of them who've talked about the problems with Iran, and it's President Trump who did. At some point, it's not Republican, Democrat. It's just a question of who's actually acting in America's interest, who's acting in Israel's interest.
Well, I was at the moving of the embassy. It was one of the most, no pun intended, moving experiences
I thought you were going there.
of my life. I couldn't believe it. It was an amazing thing to see the unveiling and Embassy of the United States of America in Jerusalem. This is something that we Jews have dreamed
By the way,
about.
when was that? May?
This past May.
So it's been 3 months?
Yep.
How much bad has happened?
Right. The predictions were right.
It was everything was going to go nuts. I mean, it's like when Trump got elected, the economy's going to go crazy. Everyone's going to be out of a job. The economic growth is going to tank. We're at 4.2% economic growth, 3.9% economic. I mean, everybody is almost cheering for bad. And yet, here he goes now on foreign policy with respect to Israel, doing exactly what U.S. policy has done, exactly what every politician has promised, and, oh my God, this is all the bad that's going to occur. And 3 months later, lo and behold, it's actually working.
Terrorist who just murdered Ari Fuld last Sunday, and he was a very well-known American-Israeli activist, very well-known in our community. Terrible that he was murdered by a 17-year-old, and the incitement against the corruption of the Palestinian youth to hate Jews and want to murder them is it's appalling. So the United States expelled the Palestinian Authority ambassador, stopped funding to UNRWA because UNRWA was also using their schools for incitement and propaganda against Israel when that was not its purpose. Its purpose was to try to help refugees, let alone what's been done at the UN. The UN was just basically a place that unfairly assailed Israel on an almost daily basis, and that's all stopped with this administration. So we are extremely grateful, and I deeply acknowledge that, with the embassy move being the most significant, or maybe leaving the Iran deal being the most significant, because they were threatening a second Holocaust when one was
Right.
more than enough. And
Taylor Force Act, huge.
Taylor Force Act.
I mean, there's a lot of.
So let me ask you this. See, this was building up towards a question. You're Catholic, and you were raised Catholic, and you're a church-going Catholic, something I deeply respect. I've had the honor of meeting 2 popes. Can I ask you honestly, as a non-Jew who participated at the highest levels of this administration, and as one of the most recognizable faces of the administration, even now that you've left the administration, do you feel that the Jewish community has shown or has not shown appreciation for all these gestures, given that there was a story in the Jerusalem Post a few days ago that the president himself, this is a report, we don't know if it's corroborated, was saying, I've done a lot for the Jewish community, why isn't there more appreciation? And then he said that the appreciation seems to be coming from evangelical Christian sectors, rather, who really wanted the embassy to move as well, rather than the Jewish community.
I think that's a tough question to answer. Even as a Catholic, I think I have been a big believer that when you look at groups monolithically, blacks, women, Catholics, Jews, the way our country and our society is today, I just don't think, if you talk about Catholics, we're supposedly very pro-life, all the things that should ascribe to what would be supported by this, and yet we don't vote in majority for this president or this or Republicans these days. I don't know that the Jewish community is facing anything different than the Catholic community. But I also don't think it's monolithic. I think there's a lot of Catholics, there's a lot of evangelicals who support what the president's doing. I think there's a lot of Jews. I don't know that it's just all Orthodox Jews. I think that you can probably look through a group of them and on different issues. But I do think that there's a lot of Jewish organizations, there's a lot of Catholic organizations that I think who have been fighting for certain issues that are not fully recognizing so many of the agenda items that are getting ticked off. So it's one thing to look at a group of people holistically and say the people, because the Catholics aren't always voting just on Catholic issues. Jews aren't always voting on Jewish issues. Where I would suggest that there's a little bit more disappointment is probably the organizations that champion an agenda that the president has supported that I don't think fully recognize it. And it's those organizations that I probably have a little bit more concern about whether or not they're in it for political reasons or agenda purposes.
So they can be more vocal, those organizations.
Or just more supportive.
People don't know, and you discuss this in your book, that you're a commander in the Navy Reserves. You just told me you have 2 years left?
11 months.
11 months, okay. So in Israel, military service is mandatory.
Yeah.
I have 2 children that served in the IDF. Interestingly, my daughter who's here, my daughter Chana, who served in the IDF, American citizen, Israeli citizen. When I ran for Congress, So my opponent was attacking me. He said, this guy's running for Congress. His daughter's serving in a foreign military. So I happened to be in Israel, and I've known Prime Minister Netanyahu since I was the rabbi at Oxford University. He used to speak for me, beginning when he was like a 35-year-old deputy foreign minister, before he was married to his wife, Sarah. So I had a meeting with the Prime Minister, and I told him about this. So he put out a statement, and he said, anyone who serves in the IDF is protecting America, because we're the first line of battle in this battle of terrorism. It was a very interesting thing. But I bring the question to you, as someone who has served in public service for many years. You were the RNC spokesperson and chief strategist, and then there's been only 26, I think, White House press secretaries? 28. And you're arguably the best known of them all. You have I saw stories about you, even in media outlets that don't necessarily like you, that were saying that you have a 65 to 70% name recognition level in the United States, which is extraordinarily high for someone in politics. How important is military service in shaping character and your career and your dedication to this country?
I think it's very important. But I think what makes our country great is we have a volunteer military. And not that I think there's elements of compulsory service that are fantastic. But I think what makes America great is that every single person that's in the Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, or Coast Guard is there because they choose to be. And there is a level of, there's so much right about the military right now. You get promoted by merit, by what you do. There are issues of race and sex and gender, but for the large part, if you think about it, you get promoted by how good you are, and also your promise for the future. So black or white, if you hit these things, if you pass this test, depending if you're enlisted or officer, and you develop this sense of relying on, in my case, the Navy, your shipmates. So you don't care if they're a man or a woman or anything else about them. Do you have my back? Are you with me? Are you going to see it through? Are we going to get the mission accomplished? And there's something that is so beautiful about that you're not looking at them as their gender or their color or anything else, but can you get the mission done with me? Can we serve this country well? And I think that's a beautiful thing right now, which is it's not about anything else about service and mission.
It seems to be the last respected institution in the country where right and left all agree that they're all heroes.
Right. Well, part of it, though, is that we check it at the door. Look, I've been serving for over 19 years. There's a lot of guys, men and women that I've served with. I don't know if they're Republican or Democrat. It's never anything that ever comes up, and frankly, it's not permitted. We don't discuss politics. Once in a while, we'll discuss a policy, how it's going to impact the military, or what talking points we might have to put out. But you check that at the door, and you inherently don't talk about politics. You share common bonds about your family and your struggles and your desire to get ahead, but you really want to help each other. I say this not in a gender way, but as someone who never, when I went to college, we didn't really have a football team. We didn't have sororities or fraternities. But this, to me, was my fraternity. Joining with a common bond with a group of men and women who only care about the country and the mission, and that when you meet another service member, there's some kind of bond that you have that's like no other.
Thank you for your service.
You're welcome.
That's greatly appreciated. Here's what I found interesting about your book. You were slammed by reviewers for displaying an empathic side of President Trump. And you spoke about his humanity, and you said many times that you wish people could witness that. And all the reviewers saying, oh, right, tell us about it. This is the guy that said X, Y, and Z. And then along comes Bob Woodward's book, and for 2 weeks we didn't know what was in the book. And I thought it was going to be the most horrendous book about President Trump ever written. It turns out that he speaks about the same empathy in many examples. He speaks about Trump calling members, the families, Gold Star families, and it's a very moving part of the book, actually. He also says the president gets very upset at times and got very upset about the Russia investigation, etc. But he speaks about the same empathy. And it kind of validated a lot of what you said. They didn't believe your detractors, because they were saying you were part of the team.
Right.
But coming from Woodward is not part of the team. They believed it. So let's talk about that for a little bit. Why don't people see more of that? You had walk-in privileges to the Oval Office.
Yep. I think there's two reasons. One is And the first, I'm not as sure, but I think to some degree he has built a brand over decades of being a tough businessman, negotiator, and that's part of the brand that he has, which is he's tough, he's a negotiator, and he's a fierce competitor. And I think you obviously, to some degree, don't want to break down the brand. So some of it's self-imposed. Some of it's I don't think the media wants to show it because they don't like that it undermines the narrative that they want. So it's twofold. And that's why I think you don't see much of any of it. But again, to your point, when you talk to people on the inside, they can tell you, Woodward does go through some of these phone calls and some of the idea of how he's trying to relate to some of the kin of those who have been killed in action. And it's the same story that I tell, but now it's obviously, because someone else wrote it, it's taken differently.
Yeah, I don't want to go through this whole over-roasted chestnut of virtually everyone that reads your book. They want to go straight to the first day.
Can I make one quick point?
Please.
I think there's a big difference, between going to look at the people who've read my book, who are people like you all, and the people who are in the media that have reviewed it. I actually think that there's a bifurcation between the two. When I look at the media reviews, you're absolutely right. There's they don't like the critique. They don't admit some of their own bias or the fact that they have been criticized in my own book. But when you look at the American people who have reviewed it online, in other ways where they're sending in comments or whatever, I'm happy with those. I've yet to get a single negative response to anyone who's bought the book, read it, and said, I didn't like it. I thought it was ridiculous. But I've gotten plenty of media ones that have done that, but I think part of it is if you look at their critique, it's all about them, which is what the problem is right now.
Well, so let's dwell on this for a moment. It's very interesting. Your relationship with the media is extremely interesting. On the one hand, it was seen, your tenure as White House press secretary was seen as contentious with some members of the media. On the other hand, you achieved a level of celebrity that was almost unprecedented for a White House press secretary. Your briefings were watched by millions of people. It was beating the ratings of daytime soap operas. You discuss in the book how there was a suggestion that the briefings even had to be moved to somewhere in the EOB, right? Because they were getting so big. And everyone was watching you, and you've become a celebrity in your own right. You also speak about how you were a little bit concerned about that because you didn't want to be the story.
Right.
But you became the celebrity, and then Saturday Night Live also helped in making you a very big celebrity. And you laughed together with Melissa McCarthy and a lot of the things, and even parodied yourself at the Emmys, which were the other night in Los Angeles.
Ratings.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw those very low ratings. So talk about that for a moment, Sean. This dichotomy of, on the one hand, you were seen as someone who was battling some members of the media. On the other hand, you were a very big fixture in the media, very, very recognizable. You were telling me that walking through Manhattan is a challenge for you because everyone recognizes you. That's almost unprecedented can anyone here name President Obama's last press secretary? Is there anyone here that can name him? Anyone know who Josh Earnest is? I mean, he's famous, but you have to be a real political person to know that, right? Or any of the people who preceded him. Maybe Ari would be the only one comparable in that kind of. Why is that? So it's interesting, isn't it? I haven't figured it out.
I mean, the reason why is obviously there's an intensity and an interest in the Trump administration like no other before. I mean, there's 49 seats in that briefing room, and if you watch it still today with Sarah, I mean, you can see it's packed to the gills, people are lining the sides. There's a level. I also think that the one thing, there is a difference between the people in the front row, the ABCs of the world, the CNNs, and the other organizations that are out there. One of the things that I talk about in the book that I'm most proud of is democratizing the press room. I called on, if you think of a group that's like this right now, the front row is dominated by the wire services, the networks, the Washington Post, the New York Times. I look to the back of the room. I look to the sides. I called on faith-based media. I called on urban radio. I called on Spanish language radio. I called on local media, conservative talk radio. I believe everybody had a voice in the briefing room. They all had a constituency that represented someone in America, right, left, and in the middle. And it wasn't up to just the front rows to decide what America read and heard and saw. So for me, my view is that everybody got a voice while I was there, and had a constituency that had a concern or an issue that deserved to be addressed.
I want to talk to you about your faith. One of the fascinating things about this administration is that although the president is not personally seen to be a religious man, not that, and I think he made a very valid point even with Pope Francis during the campaign where he said we're not here to judge each other's religiosity, but he wasn't perceived in terms of his celebrity prior to running as a religious man. And yet, he has this phenomenally strong faith-based constituency. Evangelical Christians overwhelmingly support him. He has a very strong Orthodox Jewish backing. So you're a man of faith. What is it about this administration? The administration on the one end is criticized very often for lacking values in many areas, and yet religious people seem to see something in this administration and give it a lot of support. Now, I have my theories, but I'd love, as a man of faith yourself, I'd love to hear what you think about that.
I think two things. Number one is I know prior to writing my book, I was very hesitant about ever talking about my faith. I don't think, and so that in that way, I believe your faith is between you and God. What you choose, how you choose to practice it, how you choose to talk about it, is between you and God, and ultimately you will be judged. Whether or not you evangelized enough people, whether or not you spread the word, whether or not you lived up to the expectations that were set for you, that's not for me to judge. I think we set an example for those around us, and that is one way that we express our faith. But I don't judge other people for how they, that it's. Some people go, well, I never saw them practice. That's not how you practice it. It should be how you live it. Are you a good person? Do you help others? Are you compassionate and caring? That's how I think Christ asks us to live our lives. But so I can't look at somebody else and say, oh, are they a religious person? They may go home and in the dark pray, and that's frankly in the Bible. God asks us to do that.
So what you're saying is actually a very Jewish perspective. Because sitting in this chair a few weeks ago, these are regular gatherings that we have, was my friend Brett Stevens. Brett and I are very close, and Brett is a Republican who's been very critical of the president. Mm-hmm. He's now calling for the president's impeachment. And we debated this. And I said to Brett, with all due respect, Brett's a very proud Jew, I said, in Christianity, there's a lot of emphasis on character, because Jesus is the divine clothed in flesh, and he's perfect. We Jews have no perfect people at all in our Bible. So for us, action is much more important than character, what a person does. Look at people like King David, who are heavily criticized in the Bible, but it's what you get done. So a lot of people are looking at President Trump and saying what you just said. I'm looking beyond the personality. I'm looking at, we elect presidents for policy, not personality. But a lot of my Christian brothers and sisters put a lot of emphasis on, but you're supposed to be great refinement of character. Not that there isn't an emphasis on refinement of character in Judaism. We just had 10 days of repentance where we're supposed to examine our hearts and be better. But still, action is much more important. Right. But you seem to be offering a very Jewish perspective on this, which I appreciate, by the way.
I'm sure. I mean, like I said, I think that at the end of the day, with respect to elected officials and government officials, that if you are espousing certain policies and agenda items that further your cause or your religion or the things that you believe in, you can have as much talk as you want, but at the end of the day, what you really want is to see those items move forward and show progress. And I think this administration's shown progress in so many ways. I mean, whether it's Israel specifically, the evangelical community on the Christian side, there are things that people have fought for and said, this will help us express our faith in a more freely way, or evangelize, or grow the faith. And I think this president's done it.
Well, Judaism is unique among the religions of the world in not only allowing hatred, but commanding hatred when it comes to evil. So, for example, King David says in Psalms that Ohavei Hashem sinu ra, those who love God truly hate evil. And I think that the foreign policy pursued by this administration, beginning when you were there, to hold tyrants accountable, we spoke about Syria, but there's others. At first, I was a little bit disappointed that President Trump was pursuing what I saw as policies in Turkey that were similar to President Obama and allowing Erdogan off the hook. And I think there was even a comment from President Obama at some point. He was asked which world leader, and don't quote me on this because I may be mistaken, but I believe when he was asked which world leader he got along with best, he said Erdogan. Now you have to understand, for us Jews, Erdogan is calling Israel Nazis. He's calling the IDF the Gestapo. He is just an out-and-out anti-Semite. And now to see President Trump becomes so tough on Turkey when they started kidnapping American pastors as hostages. And to see, because I want to see these tyrants punished in some way. And now we see the Turkish currency collapse by 20% in a day. The Iranian currency has collapsed by 30%. And their regime's in real trouble now because of the president's policies. And there's a religious underpinning to those policies because we have to resist evil. We just have to, because human life is valuable, Sean. It's the most valuable thing. It's the one thing Catholics, evangelicals, Jews, Muslims, we all agree on. That the one thing God taught us all that unites us all is an emphasis on the infinite value of every human life. And this administration has to stand up for those lives, and I appreciate very much when it does.
I agree.
And if you want to comment.
Yes.
Let me move to something that was, I don't want to go through the over-roasted chestnuts of, and I'm looking at the time. Let me speak to you now, human to human. I really felt for you on the first day of the administration. Everyone wanted to talk about how you were speaking about the numbers at the inauguration. And I felt for you because, and I feel the media doesn't want to see the human angle. The human angle is, this is the first day, you won the first day of a job with the most powerful man on earth. The American president wields more power than any Roman emperor. The American presidency bestrides the globe like a colossus, commanding troops in about 180 nations. I mean, its power is unbelievable. You're on the first day of your job. The president feels that the press is trying to undermine his presidency by saying, oh, no one even came. So he tells you, you got to rebut this. So let's forget about what was said. I want to speak more about how do you put up with that kind of pressure? The most powerful man on earth calls and says, go and do this. And I really felt for you. It was a Sabbath, so I only found out the story when the Sabbath was over, right? It was because the inauguration was a Friday.
That's why I wish more people were Jewish.
But that kind of pressure, talk to me about that kind of pressure.
Well, it's twofold, because the night before, the first day of the administration, the president got sworn in just after noon. We got down to the White House, and somewhere around 5 o'clock he had said, let's bring the press in and show them I'm hard at work right off the bat, signing the executive orders and executive actions. So he called the press pool in, this group of representative folks from the media. And the report coming out, this gets forgotten a lot, was not about what he had said and done in his executive orders and action, but it was that he had removed the bust of Martin Luther King. And so for the next 2 hours, we end up literally going in and taking photos and sending it out and saying, this is not what happened. You can't unring that bell. The one thing about the media is once the story is written, once the tweet is sent, you get, a negligible percentile of rebuttal. So they send out this thing.
Or the story is that you deny that it happened.
Right,
right.
It's a racially inflammatory way to start an administration. The first thing that they're hearing about this new administration is that we do that. And what's the press corps' collective reaction? Oops, our bad, somebody was in the way. But stop for a moment and understand that mentality. I didn't come in here looking at what the president was doing, who was in the room, what was saying. I went in with the goal of trying to figure out how to find a gotcha moment. That's what they were doing. So you wake up the next morning, you see that, you go, you got to be kidding me. This is literally my first 24 hours. And so part of me understood him, which was, I can't believe we're doing this. This is how you all want to start this relationship. And then part of me was like, to your point, you've got the most powerful man in the world saying, go fix it. And you're thinking, how do I do this?
And it's your first day on the job, and you kind of have to prove yourself. And
yeah, you're like, look, I got to go show that I'm gonna knock this down. And there's a new sheriff in town. And I think I got this, but I'm not really sure. And I think I know what you want, but I really am not sure. I mean, yeah. And oh, by the way, there'll be millions of people watching you.
Yeah. On the very first day of a new administration. That's pressure that it's hard to comprehend.
Yeah, I think I got a couple gray hairs.
We're going to go, we have 15 minutes. We're going to go to questions. I want to say one thing to you that I've always admired about you and why you won me over early when we started to get to know each other. You achieved this high level of recognition. I feel it never ever went to your head. I mean, you were grilled on your book tour, and you always were composed. You were never combative. You were always a gentleman, and I really respect that, and I want to acknowledge that. and I see it tonight as well. So as I'm reminded of it, I want to acknowledge it. I think it's very admirable.
Thank you.
Even when I met you in the White House, you were always so friendly. You didn't know who the heck I was. You were always warm and friendly, and you treated people with great dignity and respect, and that's a very admirable quality.
Yeah, thank you.
Go ahead, please.
Just a quick question. We've heard a lot about the difficult times that you had and the tense times, but what would you say would be the top high spot of your time?
Good question. The question is,
what was the high moment?
Yeah.
The high moment.
Yeah. So bear with me if you're. I'm from New England. The New England Patriots won the 54th Super Bowl in Houston through an epic comeback. They got to come to the White House. And I had grown up in a very working class family in Rhode Island. And I joke with people that I think I'd been to one game. And I say that because my dad told me we went to one game. I don't know. I don't remember actually going. So I trust that we did. And the Patriots come, and I got to invite my mom, my brother, his kids, my sister, my wife, our kids. And at one point I turned around and the entire starting lineup of the New England Patriots is sitting in my office. And I just thought, what an awesome moment this is for me, but more so that I got to share it. Right? You know when you have that experience and you call your loved ones, you're never going to guess what just happened to me. And then this is what happened, and this is how I reacted. But what made the day so awesome for me was that they were all there. I didn't have to explain it to them. I got to share it with them. And I think for me, when you got to have this awesome moment and be like, here, you come enjoy it with me. I didn't have to send them pictures and tell them what was going on. They got to be there with me. And I always thought to me that whether you're a Patriots fan or not, I hope you can appreciate being and saying, this is the team that my entire family cheered for growing up and we always thought was amazing. Here they all are together, and I get to spend it with everybody that I'd want to share that with. That to me was probably the highlight.
Was Tom Brady in the room?
Tom did not show up.
Okay. Well, I'm a good quarterback. I'll be a stand-in. The gentleman on the stairs. Go ahead, please.
You mentioned the fraternity and the brotherhood that you have in the Navy, in the military. Is there an equivalent that you see in society now that could parallel that could unify the country?
No.
Okay. Well,
I don't. I mean, I think there is, which is the military. I mean, it still exists. Because I think that when you join the military, you remember you swear an oath to the Constitution. You're not saying, I swear an oath to this politician, to this president, to this party. You're swearing an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States. And the only thing that you care about, I joined the Navy when Bill Clinton was president. I didn't get in because he was a Republican or a Democrat. I got in because I saw a higher purpose. And I've now served, Clinton, Bush, Obama, and now Trump. I've never cared who the president is. And I think that that still exists. Regardless, I mean, obviously the Navy's the best branch. But I think that that still exists. The problem is the other ones that exist. I love the Republican Party. I've been a proud member. I've served it at so many different levels. But I think clearly you put on your jersey then. You're a member of the party, and you fight as hard as you can for this party and fight against that party. The difference in the military, especially now, is even though I love the Navy to death, when you're I've been in a joint unit now for 9 years. You're purple. We wear different uniforms, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, but you all care about service to the country. You all have your admin and acronyms that you use in your different branches, but at the end of the day, you're all one team, one fight.
But that's an argument for there to be some kind of draft, maybe, like in Israel. I mean, Israel is a tiny country surrounded by enemies, so it has to have a draft. But there have been drafts. I know there isn't going to be a draft because nearly all Americans are opposed to it.
But that doesn't get to the fraternity question. I mean, if you're drafted into something, that's the whole issue of belonging to a fraternity, sorority, or civic group is that you voluntarily choose to join it. And again, I'm not saying that you don't have, there's a discussion that could be had about whether or not we should have some sense of compulsory service in this country on a variety of levels. I think that's a separate discussion than, is there a sense of fraternity and sorority and greater being in organizations in the country?
But addressing this issue of the growing divide of two Americas that hate each other is astonishing.
Yeah, and
the demonization of the other
right,
side.
And the one thing I would say in this is, look, as I travel the country, one of the things that Americans always do really well is like, who's going to solve that problem for me, right? So a lot of times if I'm talking to a party organization, they'll say, what's the Republican Party going to do? And I look at them if I'm speaking to a Republican group, and I'll say, I don't know, what are you going to do? The party isn't 250 people sitting on C Street, First and C in Washington, D.C. The party is the people who make it up. We are Americans. If we have a problem, we need to solve it. You're not going to look to Washington to solve it. And so here's my answer, is that politics has become pop culture. You talk probably with your colleagues, your relatives, your neighbors about every tweet, whether or not, who wore what to what bound. This is, everything that goes on in the White House has become pop culture. I think you're absolutely right. That what's happened now is the second that anyone with an opposing view starts talking, you go, oh, what a loser, stop talking. I think that if we want to change the culture, everyone needs to be part of the solution. And what that means is you need to stand up for people you don't agree with and say, hold on, let them finish. Let her have her point. But we're not allowing that anymore. The answer is, oh my God, you know what? You're a liberal, so you hate this country. You don't believe in faith. This. You're a conservative. You must be a racist, a sexist, misogynist, whatever. We immediately start the discussion with why I don't like you, as opposed to I'd like to hear what you have to say. So my challenge to everybody is that if we as America are going to solve a problem, then that is incumbent upon every one of us. And so when you're on the subway, when you're at that dinner table, when you're in the break room, and somebody starts saying, I don't agree with what Hillary said, I don't like what Trump said, say, let them have their say. Let them, and voluntarily get in the middle of that discussion to be somebody who says they have every right to speak. Let's hear them out. The problem isn't that we're talking too much, it's that we're not listening enough.
Okay. I'm watching the time very carefully. Okay, let's do... Okay. Now you've raised these expectations. Go ahead, yes.
We're here because of the values of what's going on in the world, and you having the most insight right now in this room for all of us. What direction? Are we moving the needle forward? Is this administration moving the needle forward on values? And what are the seeds of those values that we can see 5 years from now?
I think the biggest thing that this administration is doing is in the judiciary. I think whether it's appointing 2 Supreme Court justices, appellate judges, or circuit court judges, the court system, the federal court system, to me, is the greatest upholder of our values. They are the ones either on the left that interpret it or on the right that uphold it. I believe that we are moving the needle forward, moving the ball forward, or however you phrased it. But I do think that when you look at, if you are a person, now again, it depends on how you look at this. If you're a progressive, I think that you look at it and go, wow, we're moving in the wrong direction. If you're a conservative, I think I look at it and go, whether it's economic policy, foreign policy, faith-based policy, we're moving in the right direction. I think the judiciary is going to be one of the president's greatest legacies. But I'm a self-described proud conservative, socially and fiscally. I think if you are of the liberal persuasion, or if you're a progressive, you probably vastly disagree with me vehemently. It just depends on how you look at what progress is. I look at progress as upholding conservative values and advancing conservative causes.
I'm going to ask the final question here. I want to ask you as a media professional. The Jewish people are commanded in the Bible to serve as a light unto the nations. That's almost a public relations commandment. Spread the light, spread a message. And I always tell my community that there's 2 things that Jews positively suck at. Sports being the first. I don't know how many Jews were part of. There was probably Julian Edelman may have been in your office that day. But and the second is PR. Traditionally, if you go back 2,000 years, the Jews are first accused of killing God, and they don't have an adequate response, and they pay a very big price. Then they're accused of poisoning the wells of Europe and creating the bubonic plague. And then they're accused. All these accusations of demonization of Jews, all the way up to the modern times and the terrible tragedies that our people have suffered through the demonization of the abuse of public relations, and how we never had an adequate response, which is why, as an organization, we've tried very hard to make the community effective. Media-wise. So now I'm asking a purely media question. It seems to me that whoever masters media, great power accrues to them. President Obama dominated the media when he ran against Hillary Clinton the first time. He was a media phenomenon, and he won the presidency. Benjamin Netanyahu, I remember when he first started coming to speak for us at Oxford, he was just a phenomenon as a media phenomenon. And many of you may remember when he was the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations here in New York. This guy came out of nowhere, and he just dominated the headlines. And I knew he'd be prime minister just because of that alone. President Trump, the estimate is, received about $5 billion in earned media in the 2016 campaign. That's an estimate that I saw, and that probably sounds a little bit accurate. What is his secret to understanding? How does he dominate the media so much? And I understand he puts out a tweet and people get upset, but he just seems, everything seems to revolve around his, what does he know that others don't seem to know about? Because you're a media professional.
Yeah. I mean, one is, I think it's not, there's no secret sauce. He is who he is. There are certain people, I mean, to use their sports metaphor, there are people that can dunk a basketball or run a 100-yard dash. So each of us has some kind of God-given talent that makes us different. Sometimes it's more apparent than others. But he understands message and media better than I've ever been around. He understands...
What, instinctually?
It's instinctual. He knows where the ball's going. Look, I mean, you watch some people play sports and you go, how did they know it was going over there? How did they instinctively dive left or shoot the ball in that direction? How did that person make that business decision? I mean, go around big business leaders. If you ever think about some of these really successful people, like what made them think that was the right bet? There are people that instinctively have good business knowledge, have good sports knowledge. Trump has an innate understanding of where, like, the zeitgeist is of people thinking. He understands, I mean, look at the fights that he gets in. He knows where pop culture is going and where people our heads and hearts are. In a way that, I talk about this in the book over and over again. There were plenty of times when I was like, oh, you can't do that. And he's like, did it. And then, and it was like, holy smokes, you were right. Over and over again. He has an understanding that's like no other. And there's no way you're going to bottle it.
Okay, the next step for you, is it true that you're working on a talk show?
There's a lot of things that I'm working on.
Okay. Is that one of them?
And if you go to SeanSpicer.com, you can sign up and follow on all of the stuff we're doing.
A friend of mine called me on the way. He apologized that he couldn't come tonight because this was supposed to be a different date and we had to move it. He said to me, I read his book and you can't put it down. It's and it's so well written. And it's your voice. It's your authentic voice.
Even if you get the
I saw one reviewer criticizing you for not using a ghostwriter and writing it yourself. I said, God almighty, thank God. It's an incredible read.
Thank you.
And it's a great book. Sean, you're a great friend of our community,
Thank
a great
you very
friend
much.
of Israel. And but I have a presentation. Tonight is a very special night, and with this we're going to end. It's a very special night for us. When we had to move this event to tonight, I wanted to make sure that we incorporated this. I have worked in the Jewish community for 30 years. I'm 51 years old. I started at 21 as a rabbi at Oxford University. I just turned 22. But being at my side the entire time, when we got married, my wife was 19. And for 30 years, 11 years at Oxford University, and then all the 19 years here, we've worked very hard in the community, nationally, even internationally. And my wife has done such an extraordinary job of probably introducing tens of thousands of people to the Jewish Sabbath. My wife had a formative role in helping to groom great Jewish leaders today, like Ambassador Ron Dermer of Israel to the United States, who was our student president at Oxford, or even Senator Cory Booker, with whom I have some differences on the Iran deal, but Cory was our student president at Oxford. Eric Garcetti, these are two Democrats. Mayor of Los Angeles was one of our close students at Oxford. And Debbie introduced them to the Sabbath and Yom Kippur yesterday, and through incredible hospitality to innumerable, tens of thousands of people in many continents. And tonight is exactly Debbie's 50th birthday. So I asked Sean, because we Jews celebrate the lunar calendar, and the day starts at the night. So right now, Debbie turned 50, and she doesn't mind saying that she's 50, because I know that we're a culture where people are very concerned about age. But yesterday we Jews prayed for life, and thank God we're alive, and we got to be happy at every age, and it's a beautiful thing. We just had a new granddaughter that was born 5 days ago, thank God. So I asked Sean to sign a book to you, Debbie, and I want him to present it to you, and I want to wish you a very, very happy birthday. Here, he signed it to you, so I'm going to ask him to give it to you. And happy birthday.
You don't let him get away with just the book.
Can you give it to her? He signed it to you. Yes.
Thank you very much. Happy
Can we
birthday.
get the picture here? Thank you.
All right, you're out.
Without the microphone. And Sean, because you're a family man, we're going to let you get home so you can take your kids to school in the morning. I've loved reading about how close you are to your children and how you balanced all that as a father and husband when you were even in the White House. And now, God bless you for everything you've done for the country, your service, and we really appreciate your coming. Thank you. There are books downstairs. Sean's running off, and we're gonna escort him right out, please. Okay? Yeah, please. Right.